They stood where few believed they ever would, on the parade grounds of Montford Point, boots planted firmly in the dirt of history. In a nation that questioned their worth, they answered with loyalty, grit, and sacrifice. This is not just the story of Black Marines. It's the story of warriors who broke barriers, endured injustice, and still saluted the flag of a country that had not yet saluted them back. They trained in segregated camps, slept in makeshift barracks, and marched under a sun that burned as hot as the prejudice they faced. Yet they never wavered. Every drill, every salute, every act of discipline was a silent act of defiance. The men of Montford Point didn't just earn the title of Marine, they redefined it. While the world looked away, they looked inward and found a strength no uniform could contain. They weren't just fighting a war overseas, they were fighting for a place in their own home. And they won not with vengeance, but with valor. Their legacy echoes in every salute today, reminding us that true courage doesn't just fight battles it breaks chains. They carried rifles on foreign soil, but at home they carried a heavier burden, the weight of a nation still blind to their worth. These Black Marines didn't ask for permission to be great. They proved it with every mission completed, every brother they saved, every moment they stood tall when others expected them to kneel. In the face of slurs, exclusion, and unequal treatment, they forged unbreakable bonds, not just with each other, but with the ideals the Marine Corps claimed to uphold. They bled red like every other Marine, but their sacrifices came with a deeper cost, fighting for a freedom they weren't fully granted. Their names weren't always in the history books. Their photos didn't hang in the halls of power. But their spirit lived on in every battlefield charge, in every act of unshaken discipline, in every quiet moment when they chose honor over hate. They were patriots not because America loved them, but because they loved America enough to help it become better. These men didn't just serve. They transformed the Marine Corps from within, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. And today, every Marine who wears the eagle, globe, and anchor walks in the footsteps of men who made it possible, men from Montford Point who turned pain into progress and silence into legacy. They were pioneers in uniform Black Marines who marched into history not with fanfare, but with fierce determination. When the gates of Montford Point first opened in 1942, they did not open wide with welcome. They opened with resistance, suspicion, and doubt. But those men walked through anyway, heads high, backs straight, knowing that just by showing up, they were already rewriting the rules. In training, they were often given the worst equipment, the hardest tasks, and the least recognition. They were separated from their white counterparts, doubted by their commanders, and judged by a nation that questioned their right to fight, but none of that could stop them. Their excellence was their protest. Their pride was their armor, and their brotherhood forged in sweat, discipline, and shared struggle was unbreakable. As they deployed to battlefields in the Pacific, from Saipan to Iwo Jima, they proved time and again that courage knows no color. They charged under fire, manned artillery under bombardment, and saved lives in the very same trenches where others had once denied them. Their blood mixed with that of all Marines, staining the soil of freedom with a truth too powerful to ignore. They had always belonged. When the war ended, they came home not to parades, but to more segregation, more silence. Still, they held their heads high, not for applause, but because dignity was something no one could take from them. And quietly, their presence transformed the Corps from the inside out. Montford Point was closed in 1949 when the Marine Corps finally integrated, but the spirit of those men lives on in every Black Marine who serves today. They didn't just make history. They carried it on their shoulders, and they passed it on not in anger, but in honor. Their impact didn't end when the rifles were stacked and the war drums silenced. In fact, the most enduring part of their legacy began once they came home. These black Marines became fathers, teachers, ministers, leaders in their communities, men who took the discipline of the Corps and used it to build families and futures in a country still struggling to understand its own ideals. Though many never received the medals or headlines they deserved, they earned something greater: respect carved from stone, not handed out like praise. Their silence was not weakness. It was the strength of men who knew they had already proven everything. They taught their children to walk tall, to never back down, to know their worth even when the world tried to write them out of the story. It would take decades for America to fully recognize Montford Point and its Marines. In 2012, Congress finally awarded them the Congressional Gold Medal, a symbol that, while delayed, validated what they had always known: they were heroes. Not just because they fought, but because they endured. They were Marines in every sense of the word: grit, loyalty, sacrifice, but they were also more. They were the conscience of a Corps once blind to its own reflection. Today, when a young black Marine steps onto the parade deck at Paris Island or Camp Pendleton, he doesn't walk alone. He marched in the footsteps of men who refused to quit, who trained in the sweltering woods of North Carolina with the world against them and still came out, ready to serve. They are not just part of Marine Corps history. They are the proof that history bends when men stand, and because of them, the Corps is stronger. Because of them, the nation is closer to its promise, and because of them, the word Marine means more. And still, their journey echoes not only through history books or medal ceremonies, but in the cadence of every drill, the thunder of every boot on parade grounds, and the unshakable pride in every Marine who understands what it truly means to earn the title. The Montford Point Marines carried more than rifles. They carried a burden generations old, yet still shouldered it with a dignity that shamed injustice without ever speaking its name. They never sought fame. They sought fairness. They weren't chasing glory. They were claiming ground on behalf of every black man who had been told he couldn't serve, shouldn't lead, or wouldn't matter. When they were given broken tools, they built unbreakable legacy. When they were given back doors, they kicked them open and walked through the front. And when history tried to forget them, they left a mark so deep it had no choice but to remember. Now, their names are etched into the heart of the Corps. Their stories whispered in boot camps, shouted in halls of honor, remembered on walls of valor. They are the quiet giants behind the roar of Semper Fi, the silent power in the salute of every Marine of color who walks taller because someone once marched through hell to make room for them. They didn't just change the Corps. They changed the country. And they did it not with anger, but with honor, not with revenge, but with resolve. Not by asking for acceptance, but by proving they were always worthy. They were Montford Point Marines, and because of them, every Marine who comes after, of any race, any background, any creed, marches in a Corps more complete, more true, more American. They weren't just the first, they were the foundation, and their story will stand as long as the eagle, globe, and anchor still shines. In every recruit who's told they don't belong, but keeps marching. In every salute given by a black officer who once would have been denied a uniform. In every young Marine who looks up at the Montford Point Monument and realizes that courage isn't just about combat, it's about showing up when no one wants you there and still giving your best. These men weren't born legends. They became them through sweat, pain, silence, and sacrifice. They trained on uneven ground, ate in separate mess halls, and slept under a flag that hadn't yet promised them equality. But they didn't train for revenge, they trained for excellence. They didn't march for recognition, they marched because duty called. And when the world tried to box them in, they broke out and stood taller. What they gave us can't be measured in medals or ribbons. They gave us possibility. They gave us proof that dignity survives even when justice is delayed. Proof that patriotism doesn't mean blind loyalty, it means bold sacrifice, even when the nation fails to see your worth. Montford Point may have closed in 1949, but the spirit of those men never did. It lives in every integrated platoon. In every Marine Corps graduation where families of all colors cheer. In every black Marine drill instructor shouting cadence with fire and pride. And in every American who understands that honoring them isn't about rewriting history, it's about telling the truth. Finally, and with full voice, because the story of the Montford Point Marines isn't just a Marine Corps story. It's an American story. It's a story of what this nation can be when the unseen step forward, when the forgotten refuse to disappear, when the underestimated prove unstoppable. They were once denied the front lines. Now they lead the legacy. And history will never again forget their names. ChatGPT said. And their names, once buried beneath silence, are now etched into the soul of the Corps and the conscience of a country that took too long to salute them. They are no longer footnotes. They are the foundation. For every medal they weren't awarded, a generation now wears their pride. For every door that was slammed in their faces, they built corridors of opportunity for others to walk through. And for every insult they endured in uniform, they answered, not with bitterness, but with unmatched bravery. These men didn't just serve in combat. They waged war against the lie that patriotism has a color. They stood at attention when the nation looked away. They said, with every act of service, we are America too. Now their legacy stretches far beyond Montford Point. It lives in the leadership of generals like Frankie Peterson. It echoes in every Marine base that welcomes diversity not as a favor, but as a force. It pulses through the Corps with each passing generation. Black, white, brown, unified by the standard those men raised through perseverance. They stood when it was hardest to stand. They marched when the path was paved with prejudice, and they lifted a nation. Even as it tried to hold them down. We remember them not because they asked us to, but because we must. We owe them every salute, every ceremony, every story told right. Because without them, the Marine Corps would not be whole. Without them, the American flag would wave a little less honestly. So say their names. Tell their story. Pass down their truth, not as pain, but as power. Not as tragedy, but as triumph. They were Montford Point Marines. They were warriors. They were change. And they were always semper fidelis. And as the years pass and the echoes of their boots grow faint, it becomes our sacred duty to make sure their story never fades into shadow. Because these men didn't just serve, they endured. In every blistered foot, every shouted order, every sleepless night beneath a segregated sky, they carried a burden far heavier than their packs. They carried the weight of progress, the responsibility of being the first, the pressure of having to be twice as good to earn half the respect. But still they rose. They rose at reveille, not just to face the day, but to face a system that said they didn't belong. They rose on battlefields not just to fight enemies abroad, but to prove loyalty to a country that hadn't yet proven its loyalty to them. And they rose in silence when history tried to skip over them, because they knew the truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to stand. Their story is a compass for the future of the Corps, and for the conscience of the nation. It reminds us that the measure of a Marine is not the color of his skin, but the courage in his soul. That strength isn't just muscle, it's restraint, resolve, and righteousness in the face of injustice. And that true patriotism doesn't wait for permission to serve, it steps forward, even when the odds say stand down. Today, as the Marine Corps evolves, opens doors, and salutes the diversity of its ranks, every step forward is walked in their footprints. Every honor pinned to a black Marine's chest today gleams a little brighter because of what they endured, because of what they refused to let break them. So let the young Marines know. Before there was recognition, there was resistance. Before there was integration, there was indignity. And before there was progress, there were the men of Montford Point standing shoulder to shoulder, forming the silent backbone of a legacy that changed the Corps forever. They weren't just Marines. They were visionaries. They were builders of a better Corps. And they were the embodiment of the motto they carried in their hearts. Long before the world recognized their worth, Semper Fidelis. Always faithful. Always forward. And even now, though their footsteps may have faded from the drill fields, their spirit marches on in the cadence of every recruit who refuses to quit, in the unwavering stare of every Marine who knows their worth, and in the quiet resolve of those who carry their legacy without ever meeting them. These men didn't need monuments to become legends. They built their legacy in sweat and silence, in courage and conviction. While others hesitated, they stepped forward. While the country questioned their right to serve, they made history serving anyway. Montford Point was more than a camp. It was a crucible, a place where young black men were tested not just in marksmanship and discipline, but in dignity, in endurance, and in belief in a nation that had not yet believed in them. And from that crucible came something unshakable. Men who understood that real change doesn't arrive with permission. It's built through sacrifice. Men who didn't wait to be invited to the table, they earned their place with every drop of sweat, every ounce of integrity, every act of honor. In their eyes burned not just the fire of warriors, but the quiet fire of men determined to lift the weight of history off the shoulders of those who would come after. They didn't just integrate a branch of service. They integrated the very idea of who belongs in uniform. They forced the nation to expand its definition of patriot. And today, in every Marine who comes from the margins, who overcomes, who leads with honor, they live again. And every story finally told, every name finally honored, every young recruit who whispers thank you under their breath at the Montford Point Memorial, they rise again, because their story isn't just black history. It's Marine Corps history. It's American history. It's a reminder that true greatness comes not from comfort, but from struggle, resilience, and unshakable faith in what's right. So let their memory not sit in silence. Let it march in classrooms, in barracks, in parades, and in hearts. Because the Montford Point Marines taught us all something the world should never forget. Dignity doesn't beg. It endures. Respect doesn't ask. It earns. And justice doesn't wait. It fights until it stands tall in the uniform of every free man. And as the flag rises on every Marine base around the world, whether in peace or at the edge of war, it casts its shadow across a legacy shaped by men who were once kept outside the gates. Men who, despite the cold stares and closed doors, still stood at attention, still called out, "Sir," still believed that service to a country that denied them would one day mean a country that embraced them. They didn't wear their pain on their sleeves. They wore their pride on their chests. Pride in the Corps. Pride in their uniform. Pride in their brothers. Even when the nation refused to call them equals. And what is more Marine than that? They trained in isolation, but they became the cornerstone of unity. They were told to follow, but they became leaders by example. They were given less and gave more. You can still feel them in the gravel crunch under a recruit's boots. You can still hear them in the cadence shouted across the parade deck. You can still see them in the eyes of every Marine who refuses to quit. No matter the odds, their impact isn't just past tense. It's present. It's living. Breathing. Marching on in every corner of the Corps. Their sacrifice made room at the table. Their resolve changed policy. Their presence forced history to acknowledge what it tried to overlook. And long after the last of the Montford Point Marines takes his final breath, the world will still owe a debt not just for their service but for the truth they proved. That loyalty doesn't depend on recognition. That greatness doesn't need permission. And that some battles, the quiet ones, the invisible wars of dignity and identity, are just as heroic as any fought with bullets and bayonets. So when we speak their names, we don't do it as an act of pity or token remembrance. We do it because we're walking the roads they built, wearing the uniform they dignified, living in the future they made possible. They weren't just Marines. They were the soul of the Corps. Before the Corps knew how to carry it. And for as long as the eagle, globe, and anchor endures, so will they. ChatGPT said. And when the wind whips across the fields of Montford Point today, it doesn't just stir the trees, it stirs the spirit of those who once stood in perfect formation, chins high, hearts heavier than any gear they carried. That wind carries echoes of drill instructors barking through injustice, of laughter shared in hard-won moments of brotherhood, of silent prayers whispered before battle and louder prayers whispered after. These were not just the first black Marines. They were builders of bridges, of legacy, of belief. Belief that one day their uniform would speak louder than their skin. Belief that honor, once earned, could not be denied. Belief that no matter how heavy the burden, they would carry it and lift others in the process. And carry it they did through wars abroad, and through war at home. Through bullets and bias. Through frontline deployments and backdoor discrimination. And still they served. Still they led. Still they believed. It was never just about fighting for land. It was about fighting for place, their place in the Corps. A place in history. A place in the American promise. And now that place is undeniable. Every Marine, of every color, who earns their title today inherits a gift bought by the pain, pride, and perseverance of Montford Point. They may never meet those original warriors, but they stand on their shoulders with every drill, every mission, every salute. And that salute now goes both ways, from past to present. From forgotten to forever honored, because their courage reached beyond battlefields. It reached across generations. It cracked walls. It shifted cultures. It made the Marine Corps stronger, more complete, more true to its creed. And now, when we say Semper Fidelis, we must remember what it cost to make those words real for all. Let us carry their story not just on anniversaries or monuments, but in the marrow of the Corps, in the rhythm of the nation, in the soul of every person who still believes that change doesn't start when it's welcomed, that it starts when someone dares to step forward anyway. They were the dare. They were the step. They were the change. Montford Point Marines then, now always. Not just remembered. Revered. And never, ever left behind. And so their march continues, not in boots hitting the pavement, but in the lives they've changed, the institutions they reformed, and the dreams they made possible. Their stories, once buried beneath silence and systemic injustice, now rise with every oath sworn, every flag raised, and every black Marine who looks in the mirror and sees not just a uniform, but a legacy. They were not given easy paths. They carved their own through resistance, through resilience, through the raw, uncompromising demand to be seen. Every barrier they faced became a foundation for someone else to stand taller. Every insult endured became a lesson in grace, in grit, and in greatness. When they were excluded, they showed excellence. When they were underestimated, they overachieved. When they were alone, they built brotherhoods. And when history tried to leave them out, they became too undeniable to erase. And now, their legacy has transcended time. It's in the strength of the modern Corps, diverse, proud, unified. It's in the medals finally pinned on trembling hands decades late, yet still held with quiet pride. It's in the children and grandchildren who now walk paths their ancestors cleared with courage and conviction. It's in every moment the Marine Corps stops to tell the whole truth, not just about victory in war, but about victory and justice. They are the spirit behind every salute that means more than ceremony. They are the fire behind every Marine who refuses to quit. They are the whisper in every moment of doubt that says, I was here before you. I made a way. Now walk it with pride. And walk it we must, because their story is more than history. It's a call to action. To never accept a half-told truth. To never let sacrifice be forgotten. To never allow courage to be confined to skin or stereotype. They were warriors of war and warriors of change, fathers of freedom, builders of the cores, and the embodiment of a higher loyalty to country, to one another, and to what is right. So let their names ring out in halls where silence once lived. Let their portraits hang high in places they were once denied. Let every new Marine learn not just how to fight, but who fought first to make their service possible. Because they didn't just open the door, they held it open, even when no one thanked them. And now it's on all of us to walk through with honor, with awareness, and with an unshakable respect. Montford Point lives on, not just in memory. But in mission. Not just in tribute, but in truth. Always faithful. Always forward. Always honored. And so we come to the end not of their legacy, but of our telling of it. Because truthfully, a legacy like theirs has no ending. It lives, breathes, and marches forward every single day. The Montford Point Marines were more than pioneers. They were proof. Proof that patriotism can exist even when it is unreciprocated. Proof that loyalty doesn't need applause. Proof that dignity can flourish even in the shadows of discrimination. They didn't ask for history to make room for them, they forced it to. They stood in formation long before the world was ready to salute them, and by standing, they made the cause better. By enduring, they made the nation stronger. Their lives were sermons of sacrifice. Their service sacred. And their silence? That was not weakness. It was witness, a quiet reminder that some of the fiercest battles are fought without a single shot fired. And now the meaning of their story is this: that change doesn't come when it's comfortable. It comes when it's necessary. That real heroes don't need fanfare. They need faith. That freedom is not complete until every man who fights for it is seen, heard, and honored. The Montford Point Marines showed us that service has no color, but recognition does, and they demanded it. Without ever lowering their standard. They taught us that to be a Marine is to uphold values greater than your self-honor, courage, commitment, and they lived those values long before they were respected for it. And now, it's our turn. To honor them not just in bronze, but in how we treat those who follow. To remember them not just on anniversaries, but in policy, in education, in action. To say their names not just in ceremonies, but in classrooms, in conversations, and in the hearts of every person who believes in a better America. Their story ends here not because it is over, but because we carry it now. So, when you see the flag rise. When you hear Semper Fi shouted loud and proud. When you see a Marine stand tall in a uniform that once excluded him, remember, that moment was paid for. By men who had to fight just to serve. By Marines who endured just to be called Marines. By giants who didn't wait for history to remember. Then they became history. Montford Point Marines eternal. Unshaken. UNFORGOTTEN. Matched.